Caleb Matthews wasn't your average farmer. A third-generation agrarian and a hands-on craftsman, he prided himself on running a working farm that had been in his family for decades. Nestled on acres of rolling fields and time-worn barns, his homestead was a living museum of rural heritage. Every sunrise, Caleb would stroll past a patchwork of crops and livestock, pausing most fondly by his prized Scarecrow, a ragged yet endearing guardian he'd fashioned with care. That Scarecrow, with its flannel shirt and worn hat, symbolized the quirky charm and resilience of his farm. But the tranquility of Caleb's world was about to be shattered. In the same small town where neighbors greeted each other with a handshake and a smile, a storm was brewing in the form of Kerren Westbrook, the self-appointed queen of the local homeowners association, HOA. Known simply as HOA Kerren, she wielded her clipboard like a scepter, and with it, an arsenal of absurd rules designed to perfect the neighborhood. Her list of edicts spanned from regulating lawn sprinkler hours to insisting that every scarecrow meet an impossibly sterile aesthetic. The first collision between Caleb's rustic life and Kerren's bureaucratic reign occurred on a breezy autumn afternoon. As Caleb repaired a loose board on the old wooden fence bordering his property, he heard the unmistakable click of high heels on gravel. Turning, he saw Kerren striding purposefully across his field. Her expression was one of haughty determination as she brandished a thick stack of printed notices. "Mr. Matthews," she declared, her voice clipped and imperious, "it has come to my attention that your Scarecrow is in flagrant violation of our community's aesthetic standards. Its mismatched attire and haphazard construction are an eyesore to the rest of our refined neighborhood." Caleb set his tools down slowly, wiping his calloused hands on his jeans. "This Scarecrow," he replied evenly, "has stood guard over my fields since my grandfather built it. It's part of our heritage, a quirky symbol of our hard-working spirit. I fix it up when needed, and it tells a story." Kerren's eyes narrowed as she consulted her clipboard. "Heritage is no excuse for neglect," she snapped. "The HOA has clear guidelines regarding the appearance of outdoor decor. I'm issuing you a final warning. Restore your Scarecrow to compliance within 7 days, or face a fine and further action." The words stung like a slap. For Caleb, the Scarecrow wasn't just an object. It was an emblem of independence, an artful defiance of the cookie-cutter standards that threatened to erase the soul of his farm. As Kerren turned on her heel, leaving behind a trail of printed edicts and an unmistakable air of entitlement, Caleb's heart hardened with resolve. This wasn't merely about a Scarecrow. It was about standing up for a way of life that honored history, creativity, and individuality. As the afternoon light slanted across the fields, Caleb walked back to his farmhouse with a quiet vow. He would not allow Kerren's sterile vision to smother the character of his home. That night, over a simple supper of homegrown vegetables and fresh milk, he drafted plans in his head, not just for restoring the Scarecrow, but for reimagining it entirely. In his mind, the replacement would be a bold statement, one that might even mirror the overweening features of Kerren herself. Fade out on Caleb, standing by his time-worn barn as dusk settles over his land. A lone figure ready to defend the spirit of his heritage against the encroaching tyranny of bureaucratic perfection. The next morning, Caleb awoke to a bitter surprise. Hanging on the weathered door of his farmhouse was a crisp envelope emblazoned with the HOA seal and a bold title. Violation notice, Scarecrow aesthetic noncompliance. Fine, $750. Every detail of the notice was meticulously crafted to intimidate. It listed inadequate repair, improper color coordination, and non-uniform design as egregious faults. The fine wasn't just about money. It was a direct threat to force Caleb into conformity. Before Caleb could muster a response, a knock at the door announced the arrival of 2 inspectors in smart uniforms, clipboards clutched firmly in hand. "Mr. Matthews," one said tersely, "we have received multiple complaints regarding the condition of your Scarecrow. We are here to conduct an immediate inspection." Caleb, though dismayed, kept his cool. "I'm happy to cooperate," he said, "but I must see the official order authorizing this inspection. My Scarecrow, though a bit weathered, is a cherished part of my heritage and meets local guidelines for outdoor decor." At that moment, Kerren herself arrived. With her trademark air of superiority, she interjected, "This inspection is not negotiable. Every property must adhere to the HOA standards. Personal sentiment holds no weight here." Throughout the inspection, Caleb patiently presented old photographs, repair records, and even a handwritten note from his grandfather describing the Scarecrow's origins. Yet Kerren's sharp eyes caught every perceived imperfection. "That faded hat," she sneered, "and the uneven stitching, these are unacceptable." By the time the inspectors left, murmuring over a discrepancy or two, the finality of Kerren's demand was clear. Caleb had 14 days to restore his Scarecrow, or face escalating fines and potential legal action. That evening, as twilight cloaked the fields, Caleb sat at his battered desk and began drafting a letter to the local zoning office. Every keystroke was laced with determination to fight back against an HOA that sought to sanitize history. Outside, the old Scarecrow swayed in the breeze, a silent reminder of the legacy he was determined to protect. The notice lay open like a gauntlet thrown at his feet. Caleb's resolve solidified. If the HOA demanded conformity, then he would answer with a creation of his own, a Scarecrow that not only complied with the rules, but did so in a way that mocked their absurdity. A plan began to form, a plan that might just turn Kerren's own image into a symbol of defiance. Fade out on Caleb's pensive face as he gazed out across his fields, the spark of rebellion igniting in his eyes. In the days following the inspection, the tension in the community grew palpable. At local gatherings and in hushed conversations at the feed store, farmers whispered about the rampant abuse of power by HOA Kerren. It wasn't long before Caleb learned that he wasn't the only target of Kerren's draconian standards. Neighbors recounted their own encounters with arbitrary fines, selective rule enforcement, and the mysterious disappearance of funds from the HOA coffers, money that seemed to vanish into Kerren's personal treasure chest. Determined to uncover the truth, Caleb began a meticulous campaign of documentation. He set up a discreet camera by the Scarecrow's post to capture any further harassment and took careful notes of every interaction with the HOA inspectors. One afternoon, while reviewing footage from his old camcorder, he spotted something alarming. A flash of Kerren's distinctive glasses as she inspected his property, her eyes lingering on the Scarecrow in a way that suggested a personal vendetta. Fueled by the notion that Kerren's actions were less about community standards and more about consolidating power, Caleb reached out to a trusted neighbor, Marta, who had once worked in municipal planning. Over steaming cups of locally brewed coffee at the town diner, Marta confided, "Kerren isn't just enforcing rules. She's using them to bully us. I've seen records that show fines mysteriously waived for a donation or a bribe. She's running this HOA like her own private fiefdom." Armed with Marta's insight, Caleb began compiling a dossier. Photographs, video clips, copies of violation notices, and even statements from sympathetic neighbors. The evidence painted a damning picture of systemic abuse, a pattern of selective enforcement aimed squarely at those who cherish their farm's individuality. At the next HOA meeting, held in a sterile, overlit community center, Caleb took a deep breath and presented his case. "I stand before you not only as a homeowner, but as a defender of our community's heritage," he began. He displayed images of his cherished Scarecrow, now scarred by the electric cutter of bureaucratic overreach, and recounted the history behind every worn seam and faded hat. "This isn't just a fence post or a tattered straw figure. It is a symbol of a life lived with passion and authenticity. And I have reason to believe that our current policies are being manipulated for personal gain." Murmurs filled the room. Some board members exchanged uneasy glances, while others scribbled notes. Kerren's face flushed crimson as she fired back, "These are personal grievances, Mr. Matthews. The rules are clear, and you must comply." But as Caleb laid out the inconsistencies in the fines and the suspicious patterns he'd documented, a ripple of dissent spread through the audience. A few homeowners even stood up, recounting their own experiences with the HOA's draconian measures. For the first time, it seemed that Kerren's carefully maintained facade was beginning to crack. By the end of the meeting, although Kerren tried to dismiss Caleb's evidence as biased, the seed of rebellion had been planted. Caleb's dossier had not only exposed the arbitrary nature of the fines, but had united the community in questioning the legitimacy of Kerren's authority. Neighbors whispered that maybe, just maybe, the HOA wasn't infallible after all. Fade out on Caleb packing his dossier into a battered leather briefcase, determination etched on his face. The fight for his farm's identity and for the soul of the community was only just beginning. One brisk morning, Caleb awoke to a sight that made his heart sink. His beloved Scarecrow had been vandalized. Standing in the middle of his field were deep, deliberate cuts across the figure's tattered clothing and straw limbs, a clear sign that someone had used an electric cutter to refine what they deemed unacceptable. The once proud symbol of his farm now looked like a mutilated husk, its original charm replaced by an eerie, altered visage. Caleb stormed out to inspect the damage, his anger barely contained. In the distance, he spotted a familiar figure. Kerren, clipboard in hand and a smug expression on her face. "Your Scarecrow was in clear violation of our community standards," she declared coolly. "It has been modified to meet our aesthetic requirements." "Modified?" Caleb thundered. "You destroyed a piece of my heritage. That Scarecrow stood for generations of hard work and the spirit of this farm. Now it looks like something out of a horror show, and it's your doing." Kerren's retort was icy. "Rules are rules, Mr. Matthews. If you cannot maintain your property in accordance with our standards, then corrective action is necessary." Caleb's eyes narrowed as an idea began to take shape, a bold, defiant response that would not only restore his property's dignity, but also deliver a message Kerren could not ignore. "If you want a Scarecrow that meets your standards," he said firmly, "then I'll build one that does, and one that looks just like you." A stunned silence fell over the gathering crowd of board members and neighbors. With meticulous care, Caleb unveiled his plan, a new Scarecrow, handcrafted from reclaimed wood and old farm tools. But with an unmistakable twist, the face would be a hyperbolic, cartoonish likeness of Kerren, complete with an exaggerated pair of glasses, a stern expression, and a headpiece fashioned from outdated rulebooks. As murmurs of amusement and approval rippled through the room, Kerren's face contorted in anger. "This is utterly inappropriate," she shouted. "You are mocking the rules and the entire community." But Caleb was undeterred. "I'm simply reflecting what I see," he countered. "When your idea of perfection is enforced by threats and fines, it's only natural that the end result mirrors the enforcer. I'll build a Scarecrow that celebrates our heritage while also standing as a reminder of what happens when you try to erase individuality." In the days that followed, Caleb set to work. Neighbors, inspired by his courage, lent their hands and tools. Together, they gathered discarded materials, reclaimed barnwood, and even bits of old fabric that once adorned community events. Slowly, a new Scarecrow emerged from the debris, a quirky, defiant figure with a face that unmistakably parroted Kerren's stern countenance. At the next HOA meeting, Caleb unveiled his creation to thunderous applause and laughter. The new Scarecrow, striking irreverent and unapologetically unique, became an instant symbol of the community's defiance against arbitrary rules. Even some board members, chuckling despite themselves, began to question whether the strict standards were worth the cost of their collective identity. Kerren's attempts to quash the display only further fueled the residents' support for Caleb. Her warnings grew more frequent, but so did the resolve of the community. What had started as a personal grievance had blossomed into a full-scale movement to reclaim the right to celebrate history, creativity, and individuality. Fade out on Caleb, standing proudly beside his new Scarecrow at sunset, a living emblem of resistance, as the laughter and cheers of his fellow homeowners echo through the twilight. As the new Scarecrow, bearing an unmistakable caricature of her own features, took center stage in the community, Kerren's frustration mounted. Desperate to regain control, she resolved on one final, drastic measure. With a forced calm that barely concealed her inner turmoil, she announced that if Caleb did not remove the offensive Scarecrow immediately, she would escalate the matter by involving local law enforcement for disturbing public order. Kerren's ultimatum was delivered in a terse, recorded video posted on the HOA's website. "This Scarecrow is not a harmless joke," she proclaimed. "It is an affront to the aesthetic harmony of our neighborhood." Should it remain, I will have it removed by force, and I will pursue every legal remedy available. Unwilling to be bullied, Caleb gathered further evidence of Kerren's arbitrary overreach. He recorded her issuing baseless threats and documented previous instances where fines had been levied without proper cause. When the police eventually arrived at his property, responding to a call from an irate Kerren, Caleb calmly presented his documentation and a copy of local ordinances that protected his right to artistic expression on his property. The responding officers, visibly puzzled by the unfolding drama, soon concluded that Kerren's claims were without merit. As they left, one even muttered, "This is just another HOA spat." Yet Kerren was not finished. In a final bid to intimidate, she secretly hired a private investigator to follow Caleb, hoping to dig up any evidence that could be used against him. But Caleb, ever meticulous, caught the PI sneaking around his barn on security footage, a discovery he promptly shared with the board and local media. At the next HOA meeting, Caleb displayed the incriminating footage on a projector. The room fell into a stunned silence as neighbors saw, in black and white clarity, the lengths to which Kerren was willing to go. Murmurs of disapproval erupted. Kerren's face twisted with fury and panic as she attempted to defend herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. In a desperate last-ditch effort, Kerren launched into a rapid-fire tirade, accusing Caleb of defaming the community and inciting rebellion. But her words were drowned out by the resounding chorus of support for Caleb. Board members began questioning her authority openly, and several residents declared they no longer wished to be governed by someone who would stoop so low as to hire private investigators against their neighbors. By the close of the meeting, it was clear Kerren's final, desperate move had backfired spectacularly. Caleb's evidence had exposed not only her overreach, but also the hypocrisy underlying many of the HOA's regulations. The community's mood shifted from wary deference to outright defiance, and it became apparent that Kerren's reign was coming to an end. Fade out on the image of Kerren shrinking in the back of the room as Caleb stands tall at the front, his dossier of evidence in hand, and the new Scarecrow looming in the background as a proud testament to community resistance. In the days that followed the explosive HOA meeting, the winds of change swept through the community like a cleansing storm. With mounting evidence of her abuses and a resounding outcry from residents, the board convened an emergency session. One by one, members recounted their own stories of arbitrary fines, needless intrusions, and the pervasive sense of intimidation that had long plagued the neighborhood. Under intense public pressure and faced with overwhelming proof of mismanagement, the board had no choice but to vote on Kerren's future. In a historic, unanimous decision, Kerren was formally removed from her position as HOA president. The news spread rapidly through the community, sparking jubilation among homeowners and local farmers alike. Overnight, the tyrant who had once dictated every detail of life in the neighborhood was deposed. The next day, as if in poetic justice, a moving truck was seen outside Kerren's immaculate suburban home, the very house that had symbolized her rigid authority. Neighbors whispered that the property would soon be on the market, a permanent reminder that no one was above accountability. Caleb, whose determination had sparked the rebellion, now became a local hero. With Kerren out of power, he set about reclaiming his property entirely on his own terms. The electrified Scarecrow project, once seen as a defiant joke, was completed with renewed vigor and community support. Every nail and every brushstroke on the new installation resonated as a victory over bureaucratic tyranny. As the new democratically elected HOA board took shape, one committed to transparency and fairness, the remnants of Kerren's reign were systematically dismantled. Investigations were launched into the misappropriation of funds, fines were rescinded, and several board members who had once been complicit in her schemes faced legal scrutiny. At a celebratory community picnic held in the local park, residents gathered to share their relief and newfound hope. Laughter and music replaced the tense whispers of the past, and even the local paper ran headlines heralding a new era for our neighborhood. Caleb, standing proudly beside his new Scarecrow, a striking, cheeky figure bearing an uncanny resemblance to Kerren, sipped his iced tea, with a satisfied smile. Fade out on a montage of smiling neighbors, the new board's first meeting, and the vibrant life of a community finally free from oppressive rule, a resounding victory over a system that had long sought to crush individuality. The legal repercussions for the old HOA were swift and severe. In the weeks after Kerren's removal, local authorities and independent auditors launched a comprehensive investigation into the association's practices. Every document was scrutinized. Bank records, violation notices, and testimony from affected residents painted a damning picture of institutional abuse. A series of court hearings ensued. At one pivotal session, a judge condemned the HOA for illegally enforcing arbitrary rules and misappropriating funds. Fines were levied on the HOA, and several board members were held personally accountable for their roles in Kerren's mismanagement. Even Kerren's longtime legal advisor found himself under intense scrutiny, his reputation in tatters. Caleb's painstaking dossier, complete with photos, video footage, and witness testimonies, became the cornerstone of a class action lawsuit filed by the community. The ruling not only dismantled the oppressive structure of the old HOA, but also set a precedent for other communities facing similar struggles. A powerful statement that no one was above the law. Fade out on the image of courthouse steps, where a group of resolute residents, arms linked in solidarity, stepped forward into a future defined by fairness and accountability. With the legal verdicts issued and the old HOA dissolved, Kerren's personal life unraveled rapidly. Once the iron-fisted enforcer of community standards, she was now a pariah. Public hearings and media exposés recounted every misdeed, from the baseless fines to the attempted destruction of cherished property. Her reputation, once fearsome, was now reduced to a series of humiliating headlines. Within weeks, creditors began circling. Her luxury car was repossessed, and mounting debts forced the sale of her suburban home, a property that had once symbolized her rigid authority. At a final public hearing, Kerren's desperate attempts to salvage her credibility were met with bitter rebukes and stinging testimonies from former allies. The ultimate irony came when, in a final twist of fate, Kerren was seen applying for a position as an assistant property manager with another HOA, one known for its commitment to transparency and fairness. As she shuffled awkwardly through the interview, onlookers recalled her past abuses with a mixture of disbelief and quiet satisfaction. "I hope you like following the rules," Caleb muttered under his breath as he passed by, a final, poetic barb aimed at the fallen tyrant. Fade out on Kerren's solitary figure, trudging down a busy street amid whispered recollections of her once dictatorial reign, a stark reminder that unchecked power always meets its match. Months later, the neighborhood had transformed into a vibrant community united by a shared commitment to fairness, creativity, and heritage. The oppressive era of arbitrary fines and stifling regulations was now a distant memory. At community gatherings, neighbors laughed freely and celebrated the triumph of individual expression over bureaucratic tyranny. One warm summer evening, Caleb sat on his farmhouse porch, his eyes fixed on the sunset as the new Scarecrow, an irreverent, brilliantly crafted likeness of Kerren, stood proudly in the field. A group of friends and neighbors gathered around him, exchanging light-hearted jabs and recounting the long, arduous battle they had overcome. In a moment of playful camaraderie, one neighbor handed Caleb a mock HOA violation notice for excessive originality. Caleb chuckled, shaking his head as he replied, "They really tried." The remark was met with raucous laughter and applause, a final mic drop on an era defined by oppression and the emergence of a community that cherished its history and individuality. As the night drew to a close, the camera panned over the reformed neighborhood, well-lit streets, smiling faces, and homes that now radiated the unique character of their owners. The old rules had been scrapped in favor of a system that valued transparency and creativity, and every resident, from the smallest farm to the largest estate, stood as a testament to that victory. Fade out on a panoramic view of the town at dusk, a living mosaic of resilience, unity, and hope. The legacy of HOA Kerren's tyranny had been replaced by a bright future built on the unwavering spirit of those who dared to stand up for what truly matters.